All right, so 36-1, it says find all the exact solutions of the equation and then the solutions in the interval. So if you remember from the lesson, we had to establish or find an equation that represented it, all the given solutions. And then from there, we went through and solved it. So on this first one, it says sine of 5x equals 0. And when we were solving these trig equations, we said we needed to isolate the sine or cosine value or any of those things. Well, in this instance, it is isolated. So then I can take the sine inverse to both sides. And then I get 5x equals the sine inverse of 0. So now this statement here, this sine inverse of 0, I need to think where on the unit circle is my sine inverse going to give me 0, or what angle on the unit circle gives me that 0. And so on the unit circle, my sine value is 0 at 0 and pi. So I needed to write each of these with 0 plus 2 pi k, where k is an integer, and pi plus 2 pi k, where k is an integer. But notice the distance between this to this is pi. So that means that it's cyclic by pi, so I can actually combine these together into one statement. And so instead of going by a distance of 2 pi every time, I can switch that into pi. So then I can combine these together and say 0 plus pi k. Now this still equals 5x. So then I divide everything by 5. And so I know my x is going to equal pi k over 5, where k is an integer. So these are the exact solutions. Say this is all the possible solutions that could ever exist that would make that statement true for x. But now it says find all the values in the interval between 0 and 2 pi. So now what I need to do is I need to actually plug in values for k. So k equals 0. So if I plug in 0 for k, I get x equals 0. K equals 1. I get pi fifths. K equals 2. I get 2 pi fifths. K equals 3. I get 3 pi fifths. And you need to keep doing that until you find every single value that's between 0 and 2 pi. Once you've listed all the values that are between 0 and 2 pi, you have your answer and you're done. Now, if you find values that are outside 2 pi, you can't count them. If you find values that are less than 0, you can't count them. They can only be solutions that are on the interval. And so each of these values here is a solution. All right, next. Number 3. So this one, sine of 2x minus pi thirds equals negative 1/2. So I have to take the sine inverse to both sides. And so I get 2x minus pi thirds equals sine inverse of negative 1/2. So on the unit circle where my sine is negative 1/2, that's going to be here and here. So that's 11 pi 6, and was that 7 pi 6? So I get 2x minus pi thirds equals 7 pi over 6 plus 2 pi k, and 11 pi 6 plus 2 pi k. So now I need to get x by itself, so I need to add pi thirds to each of these statements. And so I get 2x equals, now if I add pi thirds, it's like adding 2 pi 6. So that's going to give me 9 pi 6 plus 2 pi k, and 13 pi 6 plus 2 pi k. And then divide everything by 2. X equals 9 pi twelfths plus pi k, and 13 pi twelfths plus pi k. So that is the all solutions, or find it, yep. And then now I got to find all the values in the interval, and so k equals 0, k equals 1. You have to plug them all until you find them. Now setting up for number 4, I have tangent squared x equals 3. So I have to take the square root to both sides, and you get tangent x equals plus or minus the square root of 3. Now I can take the tangent inverse to both sides. Ooh, pink. And so x equals tangent inverse of plus or minus radical 3. So I need to think to myself, where are all the values on the unit circle that I get a radical 3? Meaning, where is my sine over cosine? If I do that, that's going to give me a radical 3. And on the unit circle, that's going to be here at pi thirds, and here, here, and here. So that's pi thirds, 2 pi thirds, 4 pi thirds, and 2, 3, 4, 5 pi thirds. And so with tangent, because these two are only pi distance apart, I can simplify that, so I can say x equals pi thirds plus pi k. And on this one, because that one's only pi apart, I can say 2 pi thirds plus pi k, where k is an integer. Remember that, even though I'm not writing it in there, remember, k is an integer. And then you have to go through and you have to k equals 0, 1, 2, etc. All right. This one, number 6, we have the sine of arc cosine of x over 5. And so arc cosine, that statement is a triangle, right? It's our angle, and adjacent over hypotenuse. And so Pythagorean theorem, that would be the square root of 25 minus x squared. And so the sine of this is going to be the square root of 25 minus x squared. So opposite over hypotenuse, which is over 5. Let's see, number 8. Graph 2 cycles. I'm only going to graph 1. I'll let you guys finish the rest. But it says negative cotangent of x minus pi plus 1. So I have a reflection, I do have a shift, and I have a vertical shift, so I have a horizontal and vertical shift. Put that between 0 and pi. Add pi to everything. So my value box is going to have pi and 2 pi, which leaves me, if I add them and divide by 2, that's 3 pi halves. So everything is cut into halves. So there's pi, 3 pi halves, and 2 pi. Now normally with tangent it's dot asymptote dot, but because it's cotangent it's asymptote dot asymptote. So asymptote, and then the center line shifted up 1, and so there's my dot. Now tangent normally does this. Cotangent, you have to flip it, but because of that negative right here, it's going to get flipped again. And so from there, I get my graph. All right, says find the cost demand function. So you may have to go back and review a little bit on this, but remember your profit function P of X, that's revenue minus cost. To find revenue, you take your price demand function and multiply it by X. When it says find the number, so that's the first bullet point. This next bullet point says find the number of items which need to be sold in order to maximize profit. Remember, once you create your function, that equals the number of items. Plug negative b over 2a back in. This says find the price to charge per item to maximize per profit. So plug the X value into your price demand function, because your price demand function is the price you charge, so you have to plug X into that. Find and interpret the break-even points, so find the zeros of my profit function. Alright, solve the inequality, so like number 11, x squared plus 2x minus 3, so I need to find the zeros. So if I factor at the zeros, this is going to be what, x plus 3, x minus 1, so my zeros are going to be negative 3 and positive 1. Put all that on the number line, close circle. And so now I need to pick values that exist in between, so like negative 4, 0, and positive 2. So if I plug in negative 4, oops, so I get negative and a negative, so negative times a negative is a positive. If I plug in 0, I get 3 times negative 1, which is a negative. If I plug in 2, I get 5 times 1, which is 5. So 5 times 1, that's going to give me a positive. And so that right there, I have the entire chart filled out. Values that are greater than 0 are positive values, so this results in my solution. And so my answer is going to be from negative infinity to negative 3 included, then from 1 to positive infinity. And that's my answer.